Welcome to this week's edition of the 7-Second Summary, where we'll be taking a look at Overwatch League Season 2, Stage 1, Week 3. Can you believe we're through 3 weeks already? Anyways, I think most of you know the drill by now, but for those of you who are new, here's how it works. I'm going to go through every Overwatch League team in alphabetical order and tell you how I thought of their performance last week. The catch? I will have just 7 seconds to tell you my thoughts on each team. As I go through the teams, there will be 4 things on the screen. First is the logo of the team I'm talking about. Secondly, the results of their matches last week. Then my statement on their performance, it'll be the same thing that I'm saying. And finally, a rating from 1 to 10. Once I've gone through all the teams, I'll take my 3 highest and 3 lowest scoring teams and go into more detail. Talk about why I found them so impressive or so disappointing. Finally, I'll point out 1 game per day in the coming week that I'm personally looking forward to. If you only have the time to watch 1 game per day, these are the games that I recommend. Without further delay, let's get started. What a quality win! That grab was one for the history books. At least you got that stuff with Fusion sorted out. Your stock is plummeting. Barely beating the Dragons isn't terrible anymore. Now again, and back to the bottom you go. Finally a week that speaks to their potential. Please, just commit to Guangzhou. Just don't be the Valiant's first win. I didn't think you had the guts. Let's hope you just need a few weeks. Okay, now I'm very concerned. Can you finally have an undefeated stage? Alright, you lost. Can you come back from it? Thanks for confusing me from week to week. 2 crucial wins, keep it up. What? Probably the most painful C9 I've watched live. Ivy is a beast. Just another game for the Titans. The Shock was their first time getting swept. That's not nothing.
Defeat.
Man, it's been a tough season for LA so far, hasn't it? 3 weeks in, and the 2 teams representing the city have 1 win between them. To put that into perspective, Shanghai now has double that with half the teams. I know it's basically a different team, but it'll never not be funny to compare teams to Shanghai. Anyways, this week the Gladiators lost 2 games that looked very winnable against London that had yet to beat this team before in the regular season, and the Spark, who frankly looked completely lost last week. Unfortunately, both of these teams chose their games against the Gladiators to have their big turnaround, leaving the Gladiators in the dust. This week was full of hype for the Gladiators too. Their biggest offseason signing, Decay, finally turned 18 and made his debut on stage. And honestly, I think you can sum up the Gladiators season so far as not bad, just disjointed. When the Gladiators are playing, it just feels like there's a breakdown in communication between the front line and the back line. I also feel like Hydration needs to try and clean up his Brigitte. He tends to pull the trigger on his armor pack as soon as one of his tanks lose any amount of health. And while that isn't necessarily bad, it sure would be nice to have it once the team dives in on Roar 3 seconds later and melts him. Maybe this team just needs a few more weeks to truly gel, or maybe they're missing the presence of someone like Bishu who can do that kind of in-game translation. Get well soon, man.
Victory.
The San Francisco Shock went into Week 3 with a chip on their shoulder, as they were 1-2 so far this season and desperately needed to take home a few wins against the Spark and the Justice. Thankfully, they delivered. The Shock made an interesting move this week by putting in Rascal on the Brigitte instead of Architect for most of the time, even though Architect wasn't doing a particularly bad job, but Rascal is one of the most flexible players in the world, so it makes sense why the Shock would want him in there. Violet is also a notable newcomer to this team as of right now, as he's putting out more damage per 10 minutes than Jonak so far. Sinatra is also putting out insane amounts of damage on the Zarya, Moth is in discussion for top 5 Lucios in the league, and super bad memes aside, what most consider to be the weakest link on the Shock hasn't looked bad at all. To be fair, they didn't go up against the strongest of competition this week, but Super looked like a main tank that could potentially go up against some of the best that this league has to offer. And that's a very good thing, because the Shock are going to need to find at least 1 win next week against NYXL and the Eternal to make the stage playoffs. If any team can do it though, it's these guys.
Defeat.
Look, I love the Hunters as much as everyone else. I love a Meng who is representing all of the hamster one-tricks out there, and how instead of trying to hide it and play the meta, they've decided to embrace it and play around it instead, which is just such a breath of fresh air in their games. Until, of course, the teams have had a chance to watch it a couple of times. This is what the Dragons did this week, and it showed. It seemed like every time a Meng dove in on the hamster, Youngjin was ready with the stun, and once you get rid of Wrecking Ball's mobility, he just becomes a giant ult battery. After they got rid of a Meng, the rest of the team was usually quick to follow, as a 5v6 is a loss about 80% of the time, especially in this meta. This isn't necessarily the fault of the team, as their Rhine main Jachiren is currently a faithful member of Visa Hell and can't get to the US to be with his team, but look, the game against Shanghai was the first time I feel like a team really figured out how to counter the Hunter's hamster comps, and now that they've done it, every team with a brain will do it. We all knew that this would happen. I feel like the Hunters knew that this would happen. While a Meng has a fun trick, it still is a one trick. One trick that the entire team hinges around. Once the surprise wears off and teams know how to fight it, how will the Hunters respond?
Victory!
The Spitfire put together a valuable win this week as they were able to defeat the LA Gladiators in a very hard-fought game. I gotta say, I'm impressed, Spitfire. I didn't think you had the guts to bench Birdring for guard full-time. I thought you would ride with Birdring until it was too late, but no. Guard is now one of the Brigitte and Sombra roles, while Prophet looks way better at Zarya than Birdring ever did. Maybe next meta Birdring, but the Spitfire have obviously found the team setup that works for them, and the more they play together, the scarier they look. In addition to that, the Spitfire seem to have taken a crash course in GOATs because they are getting better and better at it as time goes on. Now sitting at 3-2, the Spitfire have found themselves in the driver's seat for a playoff spot once again. And with 2 games that are looking very winnable against the Dragons and the Dynasty coming up, the Spitfire could very well secure a higher playoff seed and be a force to reckon with in the stage playoffs. Just don't choke, okay?
Defeat!
What is happening here? After an entire offseason of we're going to be better, this season is going to be different, changing out a good amount of your players and your entire coaching staff, the Seoul Dynasty look exactly the same as last year, and it's so frustrating. They're just going into each fight looking confused, they don't have an identity, we've said all of this before. People have theorized that there is some in-game comms friction between Fissure and Jexay, which I wouldn't have trouble believing, but I also haven't heard Seoul's comms, so I wouldn't know. But I mean, look at this. Jaehyun gets a great pick on the Onimo here, and then the team proceeds to just sit there behind the corner, twiddling their thumbs, I guess just waiting for Onimo to get back? Sportsmanship? What is the deal here? I don't know, but what I do know is that when Fissure was on the Gladiators, the team would give him as many resources as possible to help him succeed, and commit fully with him. The Dynasty don't seem to want to do that. If Fissure gets over-aggressive, he just dies, and he gets over-aggressive a lot. Also, Jaehyun, the last Lunatic High member on stage, has been remarkably unimpressive on the Zenyatta. As much as I hate to say it, he's also one of the weaker members here. I just feel bad for Fleta at this point. A great player who seems destined to never get on a good team. The Larry Fitzgerald of Overwatch, if you will. Please, just turn it around against the Justice. I don't want your second season to be exactly like the first.
Victory!
Honestly, when I think of teams that have exceeded my expectations so far this season, one of the teams that I get excited for every time I watch them play, the first team I think of is the Guangzhou Charge. Not only do we get a good amount of different comps from this team, which makes them a blast to watch, it's honestly really difficult to find a weak spot on them. In particular, Shu has been insane so far, and should honestly be in the conversation for one of the best flex supports in a league that is full of already amazing flex support players. Hoppa has come into this roster as the captain and has looked every bit of it, really showing off his flexibility in this meta. I've also been pleasantly surprised by Rio, who has established himself early as one of the stronger rookie main tanks. Not only that, but the Charge are able to swap Eileen and Kib into the lineup pretty much seamlessly, which is incredibly impressive for any team and allows them to really play around their strengths. If I had to pick a weak point, I guess Happy hasn't been everything that he was hyped up to be quite yet, but considering how much hype he got by people like Monty in the preseason, maybe my expectations were just a little too high. Don't get me wrong, Happy hasn't been bad, just not phenomenal like the rest of his team. Anyways, the Charge have to face a desperate Gladiators team and rematch against a lossless Titans team and come away with at least one win to make the playoffs. But still, if someone was to ask me for a dark horse pick to take over the Stage 1 trophy, I would tell you the Guangzhou Charge. On Thursday, I'm going to have to recommend the LA Valiant versus the Philly Fusion. This is a must-win game for Philly if they want to make the playoffs with the eternal waiting in Week 5. However, the Valiant are desperately looking to get a win on the board before the stage is done. And the Fusion are a team that can be caught on an off day. On Friday? Wow. These are all incredible games, actually. I'm gonna have to break the rules here and recommend all three. I can't choose. A battle between two of the top 3 expansion teams right now, NYXL looking for their first perfect stage against the Shock in a must-win situation, and the Dragons Fuel rematch? Just watch them all, who cares, you don't have to sleep tonight. On Saturday, I'll go with the Spark versus the Defiant. Both teams are 3-2 coming into this match, and this could very well decide which of these expansion teams makes it into the stage playoffs. Watch the Zaryas in this game in particular. On Sunday, I'll go with the Eternal versus the Shock. Depending on how their matches on Friday go, this could be a game with a lot of do-or-die implications, and it will say a lot about how these teams perform under pressure. And there you go. What did you think of Stage 3 of Overwatch League Season 2, and what are you looking forward to in Week 4? Let me know in the comments. If you like this video and want to see more, be sure to leave a like and subscribe as I try and make Overwatch League content every week. Until next time though, that's all from me. Don't get tilted.